Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Greg Brown from Foundry, and today we have our sixth stream, I believe, for Kanova, and it's a pretty exciting release. We came out with Beta 5 on August 3rd, and we've also had a few updates within that beta since then, and Kanova's really been coming along by leaps and bounds. And so this is an alligator snapping turtle that we created for Siggraph, and we're going to go through a time lapse of that, showing off the VR portion or portions, and also the desktop portions as well. So the stream is gonna cover half of that complete workflow, and we'll come back again in 2 weeks or so and finish up the other half. And again, we have Ed with us today. How's it going, Ed?
Doing pretty good. Hope everyone's doing fine.
Awesome, awesome. And hopefully you guys saw some of his streaming last week at Siggraph, which was super cool. It was definitely one of the most exciting Siggraphs that I've been to so far.
Yeah, which one was that for you, Greg? How many have you been to?
I've not that many really. I guess six. Been to six Siggraphs, and most of the time I've been, locked away behind a computer and watching streams, and so that was only my sixth to be there at. And how about you? Was that your first?
No, I've been to a few before. Well, that was my fourth, but that was the
Wow,
first one that I went to, like the whole show.
gotcha.
Prior to that, I've only been to I did one day, because I used to live in LA, so whenever it came by
Yeah.
Anaheim or LA, I would visit. Yeah.
True. Yeah, when I was on the East Coast, there was that one SIGGRAPH in Boston, and I didn't even go to that. Like, I
Oh yeah.
tried really hard to go to that, but it was so close. I should have gone. All right, but okay. So right now, what you're looking at is roughing out a basic form for this alligator snapping turtle. I feel like I almost have to say that whole thing because otherwise it's like, oh, it's just a turtle. And the alligator snapping turtle it's awesome. I was it Sun that suggested a turtle last week or a few
I
weeks
think
ago?
I think he might have. Yeah, I think it might have been Sun. Yeah.
Yeah, that and the Etruscan boar, and then Greg went with a prehistoric boar thing that was like the size of an SUV. But I went with the turtle as I started looking around at stuff or something cool, and anything that's really spiky and looks like it could do severe trauma is always fun to play around with. And the alligator snapping turtle is one of those things. It's like it looks like it shouldn't exist in the modern world. It looks like it was just engineered to be a brutal, vicious killer, and I mean, it's almost not even very turtle-like at all.
Yeah, Greg Lomberger said he saw one fairly recently.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was at like an aquarium or what, but he said the head was the size of a basketball, which is just scary. That's
Well,
I
that's
don't want
just
to
it.
think
It's
about
like
that.
you see the photos of them. I mean, by all means, if you guys have never seen one before, just do a Google search, and you'll see pictures of people holding it up in front of the camera, and it's not your stereotypical like posing with a fish to try and make the fish look bigger thing. These things are gigantic. They're huge. And I mean, it's like if they bit down on your arm, I don't know if you'd still have an arm left afterwards. They're brutal, vicious creatures, and they have gigantic claws and actually very long legs. And as this sculpt goes on further, one of the things that you're going to notice is that for the shell, if you look at shells of a lot of turtles, which I spent a while looking at lots of turtles, many of them have a very strong shell on the bottom as well, so they can completely get inside their shell and protect themselves. And I'm pretty sure alligator snapping turtles don't have to worry about that because the bottom of their shell is very small and there's a lot of their flesh exposed. They have extremely long legs. And so, as much as a turtle can look athletic, the alligator snapping turtle looks very, very athletic and looks very carnivorous, but extremely cool looking creature. And it's just I don't know. I like looking at animals from the perspective of, wow, why did this evolve? Like what conditions caused a creature to become like this? And it looks like, I mean, if they live in Texas, given just the environment in Texas, they were meant to survive clearly, and I think they can live for like up to 70 years or something like that. I mean, really
Oh
long
wow.
living, yeah, long living creature, but very long legs. They seem like they're for a turtle rather nimble, but I can imagine an alligator looking at that and be like, nah, nah, nah,
Yeah,
that's
I
not
guess that's
cool.
why they developed that spiky shell, and they look so formidable. I guess because they have natural predators, they had to kind of fend off.
Sure. Yeah. I
I
mean,
imagine.
that's yeah. That's it must. must be something along those lines, but it's a great example of how evolution can basically cause a creature. It's like, hey, let's take a turtle and make it into a tank, and they're cool looking creatures, just absolutely brutal looking though too. And
So a couple silly
yeah.
questions. I'm assuming they're carnivorous. I'm assuming they eat fish.
I
And whatnot.
really, honestly, I don't know, but they sure look carnivorous, and I'm just gonna imagine that they are, because if they just ate leaves, I'd be kind of disappointed,
Yeah,
actually.
same here.
It's just like, no, they're harmless. They're
Yeah.
great pets. I don't think that's the case. But right now I'm in the VR portion, roughing out, which Ed and I have talked about this many times. The roughing out of proportions for a sculpt is just it's great in VR. You really can't beat the experience, and I found, especially for roughing out base shapes, I've been able to kind of rough things out about 3 times as fast or so on VR. And then you hop on over into the desktop side, and that's one of the big things we like to kind of promote about Kanova is this ability to switch back and forth, where you literally can take your headset off and just just pick up your tablet and slide on over to your desktop and continue working on the desktop side. And that's something that we really wanted to make sure worked well from the very beginning.
Mhm.
Yeah. And they have these big meaty tails. Like, I wonder if anybody tried to eat one of these things.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure there's somebody. There's
Yeah,
somebody out
somebody
there.
tried for sure. It's just that I don't think there are many stories about it, which that's even more intimidating.
No one survived.
No one's.
That's all we know.
Yeah, I'm actually going camping starting tomorrow in West Texas, and yeah, it's gonna be like 100 degrees all week. So
Whoa.
I'm wondering how much hiking we're actually going to do. We'll see. I think we're gonna end up swimming quite a bit more over Lake Travis area, so it should be lots of fun. This place, Pace Bend, has all
Oh,
these
cool.
these cliffs that overlook the lake, and there's all these great pictures of people jumping off the cliffs, which of course I want to be a stupid middle-aged man and do that. But
Well, tell all the alligator snapping turtles I said hi, and
yeah, there's
I'll be
gotta be
here.
some around. We're actually gonna go to the place called Franklinsburg. Probably wrong about that, but we were looking at Airbnbs and in the Franklinsburg area, and it turns out there's this place that has like all these exotic animals. Like they have a tiger there, which I'm not very comfortable with the notion of that, because it's like in a cage, and I don't know. That's just a tiger. That just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, it's always
Yeah,
it's
but
always
they
kind of
sad.
sad. Yeah.
Yeah, but they have emus and zebras, and
Oh
it's
wow.
like, yeah, so you kind of have to swing by and at least take a look at that. But it's like, wow, emus, zebras, and tigers in West Texas. I guess the environments are sorta kind of similar. I don't know what kind of tiger it is.
Yeah, I remember driving through Texas. It wasn't until I kind of got into like the central or like the eastern side where it actually started to look like hill country and kind of
Hmm.
like more green. But it was desert for so long.
Yep.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, if you take a look right there, as on the turtle, I had created these initial limbs, but the alligator snapping turtle is surprisingly articulated. Like a lot of turtles that you look at, it's just like they're these sausage-shaped like limbs coming out from their shell. And in the case of this snapping turtle, it's not. Especially the rear legs are very articulated, and you can see a very clear distinction between the actual forelimbs and the actual like the lower legs and stuff like that. You can actually see that distinction there. Surprisingly strong, muscular looking animals too. So I can just use the erase brush just to erase the work that I'd already done, kind of establish the shape for that kind of thigh region, and then kind of extend the limb further out from back, kind of giving a little bit more articulation. And in the case of the front limbs, kind of refine that a little bit more. But really wanted to have something that looks like it's just floating in space. Because at some point, especially as we start taking sculpts like this further and further, we'll be bringing sculpts into Modo, retopoing it, and actually have things that look far more like production assets. Kanova really has, performance-wise, come an incredibly long way. I actually was clearing off my hard drive this morning because I have all these sculpts from earlier webinars and just stuff done internally to kind of test the application out. And a lot of the files I noticed, because I was just like, okay, organized by file size. A lot of my early files were like 2 gigabytes, 3 gigabytes, and so
Yep.
I
Yeah.
was just chewing up memory on or drive space on my computer. And this actually, in its final state at 4.5 million polys, was 215 megabytes,
Oh wow.
right?
Yeah, that's tiny compared to what was
Yeah.
before.
I was talking to Vil about that yesterday. Just kind of saying this is amazing. You've done an incredible job, and he's like, yeah. He's like, that's. I can't wait to do that even on the actual memory side of things too, because there has been many improvements as far as how much memory is used. But it's something that he thinks is a good example of how far he can take other elements of Canova, as far as increasing performance and efficiency. So going from 2.5, 3 gigabytes down to 215 megabytes. I mean, you're talking about a tenfold decrease. That's pretty impressive. And with this latest version with B5, it just like all the other betas before it, each version I'm able to do more and more and more. One thing while we were talking there that happened, if you notice, I was pulling stuff out of the menus on the desktop side, and that's one of the things we added, I believe, in the second B5 release, which was just right before Siggraph. And you can now remove various elements, dock things on either side. You can even dock things on the bottom, but that's actually something that I think we probably will remove the ability to dock on the bottom and top for now, because I think just UI wise we need to actually create menus that are engineered to be laid out horizontally, which they currently are not. Okay, so now I've created another layer. I've got this base shape that I roughed out in VR and then hopped over to desktop and kind of refined the form a little bit in desktop. But I created a new layer, and I have those panels sitting off the window or up outside of the recording space, so they're easily accessible to me, but don't obscure what you guys are seeing. And in this new layer, I was able to just go ahead and draw the kind of shell shape on top of the base form, which is one of those things that Canova just does and is super useful, and functionality we hope to expand as Canova continues to develop. But the experience in Canova right now, in this beta 5 versus our initial early access release in April, it's a night and day difference. Has that been your experience, Ed?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't get over what I'm seeing here. I mean, I remember because you kind of demoed some of this during Siggraph, but just the ability to kind of lay clay on a different layer is just so amazing. Just watching it in action is super cool.
Especially as we start adding more functionality surrounding that, because I mean, it really is one of the most frustrating things, or one of the only really truly frustrating things about being part of a project like this is looking at it and saying this tool and saying, wow, we should add this and this and this and this, and then at the same time you have to say, okay, hold on, we need to step it back a little bit, make a good experience, and then start talking about additional features, because it's really easy to think of new features to add, because there's so much possibilities when it comes to this kind of free-form technology, and outside of sculpting as well, not just for sculpting. And one thing we want to emphasize is technology like this at Foundry, we're not just looking at it for a sculpting application, we're looking at it for other things too. We think that technology like this could be the future of modeling in general. Basically modeling without the constraints or the technical knowledge of how to construct, say, for instance, a subdivision surface mesh. We kind of are starting to think that there are other ways to construct meshes that are highly controllable and reliable, and ADF has really led to a lot of insights for us internally in that regard.
And that's what's so exciting, because it's just kind of uncharted territory. It's just a unexplored new frontier of modeling possibilities.
Yep, and it's fun working with Vil, because Vil is just ridiculously excited about this stuff. The nature of working on a demo for Siggraph, for instance. We were putting together our demos, and when you are working with beta software and you're releasing new kind of, I guess we'll call them sub betas. We have betas behind the scenes you guys don't always see. Stuff breaks a lot. It's just, that's software development. And It was like Friday, and I was like working on this critter, and I had a bunch of problems, and Vil's in London, and I'm like, oh my God, do I even contact him about this? He can't do anything. He's spending time with his family now, and so sent him out a message that night, and he was asleep, and then the next morning I'll wake up to like, yeah, I fixed that on Saturday morning, and it's like, oh my God, you're making me feel terrible. Thank you so much for that, because you're amazing and we needed that. But it's like, oh my God, I have to live up to this. But it's great, working with a guy like Vil, because He always just nails it. He always makes sure that everything gets taken care of. And great job developing this application so far. And as you can see, the performance is really nice at this point. It's coming along, and as far as that's concerned, we really are only scratching the surface. We're very focused on just feel and experience right now. We spent a lot of time on performance on each of the betas, but as we get an actual release out the door, then we can kind of go back and revisit that with each release. Like, okay, so how, what options do we have to really amp up performance another dramatic degree for this next future release? And I think in a few versions, this application is going to be absolutely insane.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I can't say enough nice things about Vil. He's not only is he like a genius, but he's fast and
yeah,
always working to improve things. It's incredible.
Yep. Always takes the initiative on himself.
All right, we got a little comment from Neron. Says the shader looks pretty cool. So yeah, I totally agree. It's that was implemented a couple.
Yeah, it was just some changes, just some material changes. We switched over to this green because that's what I always kind of use in other sculpting applications. Is kind of a green waxy-ish material, kind of clay-like waxy-ish material. And we do have a subsurface material. I think it's used in small portions of this video, but not very often this time around. We're actually looking to make matte caps in the short term. Be more of the standard shader that you use, just because we want people to have a lot of options with their shading, and readability is so important. The other thing that changed with this shader compared to the earlier ones is a little bit tighter of a spec, because the spec was way too broad and too rough, and so I really like having my speculars tuned just right, so I can read my forms well. That's super important.
Greg, have I noticed you using the ribbon tool a little bit more, or is this have you always kind of worked that way?
I've mainly used the ribbon tool quite a lot. In fact, I've probably started gravitating back towards the sphere brush a little bit more recently.
Okay.
Depending, but yeah, the ribbon brush. If you're kind of building up a form, if you're kind of giving it, like sculpt-wise, if your perception is I'm deforming this and I'm kind of pulling the surface, then I use the ribbon brush a lot now. Again, to clarify, you never are pulling the surface. You are always adding additional clay, and we adjust the strength of how that's added to slowly pull or add more clay. But you are truly building out a 3D volumetric form in this case, so you're not just deforming a shell. And I want to make sure that is fully understood, because it does offer some insights. One thing I wasn't too happy with was the face. The face could look a lot more interesting. I think he looked a little bit like too friendly. He looked like a vegetarian snapping turtle, I guess. Like not all that intimidating. But this was fun, because this is the first time on a sculpt I really started saying, hey, I've got enough performance here. I can really start detailing. And I got through a good portion of the front of the turtle, and I still need to do the back, which I don't know, maybe at some point after I get back from camping, I'll be desperate to get back in front of my computer. I'll probably have my withdrawal shakes at that point, and probably play around with it this weekend. And the second portion, we'll probably see a lot of the detailing, including the additional stuff that I need to do. But I was surprised at how far I was able to get for Siggraph.
Yeah, you took it really far. The like the scales and like the cracks on the forearms and the shell itself are just turned out really nice.
I was impressed. I mean, workflow wise, I honestly wasn't too happy with it, because I had to sculpt every single one of them. But for what my role in this project is, it's like, okay, can we add that detail? And then once we see that we can add that detail, it's like, all right, so what features do we need to make that practical workflow wise? And so at least it shows that investing time on detailing workflows is going to be worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but yeah, lots stronger this time around. I feel like I'm using the brushes a lot more loosely, a lot more liberally than I did in the past. My strengths are still pretty soft, but much higher. I'm just getting results that I feel like I can anticipate at this point. And so that in itself is pretty cool. And also the detailing work, the kind of, which you really won't see much of that at all in this video, was done in the hotel room at Siggraph. and so it's done on my laptop. And so it's done on a quad-core mobile CPU, and also with a GTX 1070. But Kanova is not very GPU dependent. Most modern graphics cards can handle 4 million polygon mesh very easily. And so the GPU is never the bottleneck. It's usually the CPU in the case of Kanova. And it still held up just great on a mobile CPU versus my desktop CPU here.
So I'm a little bit disappointed that your laptop didn't have a RTX Turing Nvidia. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, disappointed that it didn't have something that isn't out yet.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. I haven't heard any announcements of mobile RTX. But man, did you watch the announcement yesterday for the commercial stuff?
Oh no, I missed it. I missed yesterday. Is that coming from
Gamescom? Nvidia,
Gamescom, yeah.
Nvidia did an announcement at Gamescom for their GeForce RTX, and a pretty broad range. I mean, they're gonna have. It's strange. I think for most people that follow GPUs, I mean, some people like collect baseball cards. I watch GPU videos, but it was a strange release in that how it was released. I mean, it was signaling that, hey, this is a new architecture, a truly new generation, not an incremental generation, by naming it the 2080 instead of the 1180, which made sense. A lot of people were predicting that ahead of time. But also just that they released a 2080 and a 2080 Ti and a 2070. And actually, I think there's going to be two versions. I think there's going to be a Turing and a Pascal version of the 2070. I think it was kind of unusual. But the 2080 Ti almost seems to have taken the position of what used to be the Titans, because it's a $1,200 card.
Yeah, it's not cheap. Yeah.
No, it's not. But it's also, I mean, that's exactly the type of thing that I'll eat peanut butter sandwiches for 2 months to get my hands on. Because and the games they showed, one concern, of course, people have on the consumer side of things is like, well, what's going to support this? This RTX technology is somewhat proprietary, but they showed off 3 games, including Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I think, and also a new Metro game that's coming out. And oh my goodness, it looks gorgeous. And then just today I saw an article that was talking about all the upcoming games that are supporting it. And it's a big, big, big long list. And so, yeah, exciting stuff. I mean, this is, like you and Greg Leuenberger were streaming live from Siggraph. And I think in one of our little talks, we were talking about, what was the most interesting thing here. And that was the Quadro RTX announcements, which were, I mean, talk about like an earth-shattering reveal at Siggraph. I mean, just wow. The real-time ray tracing demos that they showed were absolutely astonishing. But Greg Leuenberger and I were talking about this feeling like the Half-Life 2 and Doom 3 days.
Right.
Because, I mean, for those people who were around at that time, I'm sure you remember how big of a deal that was. It was a complete change in real-time graphics. I mean, just it wasn't incremental. It was a complete shift in the way everything was done and how everything looked. And I think the stuff that we saw from Nvidia at Siggraph and also at Gamescom yesterday is signaling the same degree of change again. It's as significant because I mean you're really talking about like what 15 years ago we would have referred to as being VFX workflows. Now it's all the same. It's all real time and it really for the most part the same stuff. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, that seems to be the takeaway. A lot of people said that just Siggraph in general this year felt like kind of like a monumental kind of event. It didn't feel like a smaller Siggraph. It just felt like kind of a game changer.
Even though it was, yeah, Vancouver is a notoriously physically smaller Siggraph because I mean, when you have Siggraph in LA, everybody is like, yeah, I guess I'll come, because there's so many people there working in various industries. In Vancouver, a lot of people are like, oh, I'll skip it. But it was a very important Siggraph. It's pretty cool stuff. And apparently a lot of the people they have working at Nvidia right now, working on this stuff, wow, they got some real heavy hitters. I don't want to mispronounce his name. I think his name is Turner Whitting. He's Pete Siegel introduced me to him at a Siggraph a couple of years ago. And here, Pete Siegel is one of our brilliant developers. He's been to every Siggraph since the first one. if you see like a guy with like ribbons that are basically down to his feet at the bottom of his badge, that might be Pete. But Pete and I ran into Pete at I guess an Nvidia Limelight event a couple years ago, and this guy just walks by, and Pete's like, "Hey, Turner," and I'm like, "Oh, who's that?" He's like, "This is Turner Whitting, father of ray tracing." I'm like, "Oh." It's like, oh, and apparently he's at Nvidia now and has been participating in these projects. They talked about it yesterday, and it's like, oh man, they've really brought in some of the real big name heavy hitters to work on this stuff. But that's no surprise coming from Nvidia.
Yeah, it's amazing, but you know how Pete has been to every Siggraph. That's really. I think did he skip one? I think he might have skipped one.
Did he? Did he skip one?
I could be wrong.
It's possible. Sure. I mean, maybe he had some debilitating illness.
Maybe Alan skipped one or something.
Possibly.
That might have been it.
Yeah, I think Alan's one of those guys that's been to almost all of them too.
But Pete is super cool, super knowledgeable guy. Always fun to talk to. Always fun to listen to because most of it just goes right over my head. But you just know that he's he's been around for a while.
Depends upon what environment you're in with him. I mean, he is one of the most charismatic engineers I've ever met. Like, and if you want to have like a good time at night at Siggraph, just hang out with Pete. It's like he knows everybody, but he's also just not bashful. He'll just talk to anybody. He'll talk your ear off. But he's just a fun guy to hang out with. All right.
Okay, Neron asked, with the layer system, will we be able to work on more?
You mean by adding a new layer, you're able to actually achieve higher, adding layers means that you're going to have improved performance, basically?
Yeah, Neron, maybe you could clarify a little bit.
Well, I think that is what he means. But please clarify. But I'll just go ahead and go with that for now. Yeah, from what I was just saying, yes, if you work across multiple layers, it can improve your performance. And in fact, on this sculpt, what I end up doing is I end up breaking apart the body into 3 sections. I think 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 3 sections for the actual body that's inside the shell. And so I separate the back from the front, and the head I actually remove and then insert it into the skin folds that are around it. And that a lot of that stuff is will be in the next video in about 2 weeks. But yeah, I'd run into a point where I was like, I feel it kind of slowing down right now, and I want to maintain performance. And I've got the separation from front to back blocked by the shell, so I'll just separate this out. And what you do is you take that layer, which is the body, you duplicate it, and then you erase, the front, and then you've got a back portion, and then duplicate again and erase the back, and now you've got the front portion. And right here, what I was trying to do is I wanted to have you guys see a little bit more of what's going on with the wireframe. And there wasn't very long, was it? Okay, hopefully there'll be a little bit more a little bit later on. I had to cut a lot of video out of this to keep it down underneath an hour, which, by the way, the desktop portions are a 6 times time lapse, and the VR portions are a 3 time lapse, which I just find on the VR videos, the VR recordings, you really don't want to go over a 3x time lapse because of your head motion. It's really nauseating.
Okay, so really quickly, Greg, I actually misunderstood. Neron asked, he didn't say more, he meant morph. So his question was, with the layer system, will we be able to work on morphs, like for facial expressions?
That is, no, currently no. It's an interesting request, but the big thing with morphs is morphs require identical geometry, right? Modo has some interesting stuff where you can transfer a vertex map, which a morph is a vertex map from one mesh to another. In some cases, it can do an incredible job, and other cases can be kind of rough. But the big thing with morphs for a final asset is you are deforming the mesh that is static, and so your point order is always the same. In the case of Kanova, since you're constantly adding clay, the points on the surface are constantly changing every time you touch the brush to your surface. So a classic morph would not work with Kanova, but it could possibly be leveraged to create many morphs and then transferred after the fact.
I'm just looking at like how small the underbelly, like the undershell is.
That's not. In fact, mine's a little bit bigger, I think, than.
Wow.
Yeah, because it just didn't look right. But I mean, they're super crazy fleshy, and it's like I can't help but just think, like, okay, so that was naturally selected because nothing messes with it. It doesn't need to really hide away in its body and collapse its shell the way that some of these smaller turtles can. Because those turtles, they rely upon that for survival. Like that tail doesn't go away. Like, I mean, that tail effectively turns this thing into like a living weapon. Like, I could imagine like a caveman just like swinging it around as like some brutal living weapon.
So that just makes me think that you said that their limbs are super like there's a lot of articulation
Yeah.
there. They must be fast, like if they have that much space to kind of move around
All
underneath
things
their.
considered, maybe. I mean, they are a reptile though, right? And so they're cold-blooded. I'm pretty sure.
Right, right.
And so they, probably depends upon how warm they are. It's like alligators. Alligators really aren't all that fast. They're fast when they need to be, but it's not like they can, maintain a high level of performance without being warm. So yeah, I wonder. I don't know.
And are
Amazing
they?
creatures though.
I guess they're these turtles. The alligator snapping turtles are land, or are they water
I
turtles?
think they're water. I think they're
Okay.
both, but I think they spend a lot of time in water because most pictures I looked at, they seem like pretty gooky and kind of
Mhm.
collected, and like maybe they don't move all that much. But man, if I was a fish, I would be terrified.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely brutal looking creatures. It's actually kind of cool. Like Texas has a lot of interesting creatures like this. Like one of my favorites growing up. Like I was born in Oklahoma, lived there till I was 8, and then moved to New York. But one of my childhood memories is hunting horny toads. I think more appropriately they're called horned toads, but we always called them horny toads when I was growing up. And they're really cool. They're small, but they have all these spiky horns all over their bodies, and they're pretty fun to run around and catch. I think they're a little bit rarer than they were when I was a kid. But I mean, you look at these things, and man, they're just they're just engineered to be survivors. Tough little things,
Yeah.
but absolutely beautiful. And the shell, we'll get to the shell. Like right now, I'm actually at the point where I'm starting to mess around with the shell, and I really was not looking forward to the shell. As we start adding custom brushes, which is going to be coming for Kanova, we're looking at how we're going to do that initially, at least. But that is something that we definitely are going to, be adding in the ability to use in Kanova over time. I would love to be able to make a custom brush just for the spiky areas. But in this case, since I'm using very basic sculpting tools and developing my forms with those basic sculpting tools, you end up spending a lot of time building out these more complex forms, like the spiky, the actual spiky aspects of the shells. And in fact, I wasn't. It was too spiky. I definitely way overdid it. But it was an interesting experience just to see, like, all right, so how are we going to do this, and how well does this all actually perform? And it did pretty well. I got through it relatively fast, faster than I expected. But with a custom brush and then being able to throw on the headset, for instance, that would have been absolutely perfect.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, really
Yeah. I
held a
like.
lot of detail.
I was just gonna say I really liked how like just how spiky the shell turned out at
Okay,
the end. It was like little tiny pyramids on his back. It was
thanks.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It was kind of. I was thinking it was more of. Is it a Koopa Troopa? Is it a
Oh
Koopa?
yeah.
Yeah, or it was like a
I think so.
baby,
Yeah.
or it was like more of a baby Bowser.
Yeah.
I am so tempted to get a Switch, a Nintendo Switch. Like when Warner McGee is posting videos of himself like playing Mario
I've seen
Kart.
him. I've
I
seen him.
know
Yeah.
it's
I'm
like
so tempted. Yeah.
Warner's
I know that would be
posting
such a
like
disaster for my
gameplay
time
videos. Oh
management.
yeah, well, not if you're playing with Warner and other Moto users.
Yeah. I guess not.
That's outreach. But oh, Mario Kart. Oh, it looks like
Yeah.
such a good Mario Kart too. It's funny. I growing up, I got a Nintendo, the original Nintendo. That was a big deal, and I think I had like throughout the lifespan of that console, I probably had like maybe 5 games at most. But then after that, I got a Genesis because I was like still pretty young. And then after that, I just really didn't go after consoles at all. I got into PCs and PC gaming, and I've always loved PC gaming. But there's always been one exception, and that's been Nintendo consoles. because through the years they always seem to offer something really interesting. Like I love the GameCube. I bought the GameCube because of Mario Party. It was just so much fun, and so I picked that up. And then of course the Wii. The Wii came along, and I got the Wii because it was the Wii, and like everybody else, needed to be reminded how out of shape I was by using an active game system. And then now again with the Switch, like Nintendo just always comes back with something that they're like, no, no, you want this. You definitely want
Yeah,
this.
they seem to always have like one or two games that you just have to have because
Yep.
everyone else is playing and you don't want to be left out. Yeah.
Yep. This new Mario, is it Mario Galaxy? Is that the new one? I think. I don't know.
Super Mario Odyssey is the new
Odyssey.
one.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go. Yeah. Oh, the one for Wii. Was that Mario Galaxy 2, I think.
Yeah, they
Um,
had two galaxies on the Wii and the Wii U, I think.
there you go. Yeah, Galaxy 2. There's 120 stars in that game. I got 119.
Oh, whoa.
I don't know. It's like one, but I mean, I needed to get that last star.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
they just do like such a good job designing their games. They're just fun to play. You just kind of get lost.
they do, and they always, like, from a PC gamer perspective, it's like every time I see a console, like, if I see an Xbox or a PlayStation, I'm like, it's cool, but aside from certain exclusives, I have everything I want on my PC and more. But there's always something from Nintendo that it's like, no, that's unique. I want that. And
Yeah, because they just seem to go in such a different direction because they can't compete with the higher end consoles. And if you're already a PC gamer, why would you even buy one of the higher end consoles?
right, exactly. Unless you're absolutely desperate for some specifically exclusive title. I'm still annoyed that I'm not sure whether or not it's happened yet, but the latest Silent Hill game on PlayStation, they had a VR mode. And they came out with the same game for PC, but they didn't include the VR mode, and it's like, I definitely want to play that in VR. Like, that sounds
weird.
horrifying. But yeah, it was an exclusives deal type thing. All right, so I went through and I kind of blocked out the basic shapes for the outer ridges, and I was happy with the general shell shape. And so now I'm just going in there and kind of getting my proportions for what how much space each of the actual spikes is going to take up. It's one of those things you don't want to go in without any planning, of course. And super easy, just sketch that out and kind of decide, when you're happy with what you see. And this first one that I do right here was definitely done very clumsily, where I just start building it up and building it up and building it up. You can see right there, it's just like, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to and just scribble all over the place. And that was a bad idea because then it was annoying to deal with and refine. And the later ones that I do, I actually create a pillar coming out. And I think that's actually, to some degree, part of the reason why I ended up making the spikes overly large was that initial pillar, but it made it much easier to go through and build this stuff out, and really didn't take very long once I kind of got a workflow that I was more or less happy with. But an interesting way of working for sure.
Now, when you were making the radial grooves around the rim of the shell, like where the top meets the bottom, did you were you paying attention to how many you were making because you wanted it to kind of because you knew what you were going to be sculpting next?
I was paying attention just to the spacing, what looked good, and trying to make that feel fairly consistent. Maybe tightening up as you got to the front or the rear, and widening at the I guess the middle of the sides. It's just more aesthetic decisions, and then at that point, then go ahead and start thinking about the actual interior grooves. I'm not sure, actually. I don't want to look at any reference imagery. I'm not sure if those radial ridges actually correspond with the ones on the inside. I'd be surprised if they didn't, but these don't. So anyway. Yeah, I can't help but think that, for Bowser, they definitely saw an alligator snapping turtle, and it's like that is going to be our villain for sure. We'll just make it, spit fire.
Yeah, he's like a dinosaur turtle with a red mohawk,
Yeah.
an orange.
Well, I mean, of course he has a red mohawk. I mean, that's the least weird part.
Yeah, and then there's Baby Bowser, and he's got kids from Super Mario 3. You have to fight his kids, and right? I mean, he has
you have to go through a couple castles. Like, each castle I think has one of his kids or something like that. Oh, the Super Mario with the raccoon tail.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Tanuki suit. Yeah.
And that movie, The Wiz. I think I brought this up in a couple casts ago. Like I was just looking for something to watch on Amazon, and The Wiz popped up. Do you know The Wiz?
That's the one with Fred Savage where,
Yep.
yep. It's
And
been a while,
Christian
but
Slater. Like I still don't understand why Christian Slater was in that movie at that time, because he had like a burgeoning career at that time, and but he was, for some reason, he was in it, and these other fairly well-known actors. But yeah, about Fred Savage's trek across the country with his brother who has problems. Yeah, it was a video game, Wiz. But yeah, that was the where they first showed off, I think, Super Mario 3.
yeah, and he finds the whistle immediately. I do remember that. He's like, would you
You're like, that's not real. That's so unconvincing.
Yeah.
Nobody would do that.
So this is interesting. This is what you were talking about with the pillars. You're kind of like just establishing the height.
Yeah, and then playing around with making these ridges, and then if you notice, like I tighten up, like trying to make like, well, I start making a big long stroke at first, and then making that stroke closer and closer towards the center to try and make a straight ridge. And I end up playing around with a lot of things similar to that as I kind of go through the whole sculpt and the other ridges themselves, because I really wasn't sure how I wanted to do that. Now, again, a move brush with a special tip, that would be so cool. We are playing around with the move brush. I gotta say, it's one that we are spending a lot of time on right now, and it is challenging. If you look into some of the articles from Medium about their experience making a move brush, it's no joke. They had to, in fact, use kind of a hacky method. We may be approaching similarly, but it's a very challenging tool to make in a volumetric setting.
Now, does it kind of go back to what you were saying earlier, just because of the nature of how you're sculpting? You're not actually manipulating what's already there. You're always adding kind of.
Yeah, you're
adding
not,
to the surface.
You're not grabbing points and deforming them. What you're doing is you're grabbing a volumetric data structure and moving it. It's just a completely different approach from what has been already well established when you're deforming a persistent 3D surface. And the thing to always remember about applications like Modo or just 3D in general, it's not okay. This is going to sound terrible, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it. 3D applications like Modo have a 3D viewport that represent the three axes for 3D space. But the stuff that we make, in my opinion, is not 3D. It's actually 2D surfaces stretched throughout a 3D environment. Because we're creating these shells, right, that are completely vacant, and there's no data inside a closed 3D form like that when you build something out of polygons. And so it's one of those things where you need to remember that you just have this very simplified data structure representing surfaces with points representing a 2D surface being stretched throughout 3D, and that's not something that is terribly challenging these days after we've had this all well established to deform in a predictable way. But grabbing a full three-dimensional data structure like this and just yanking it around is scary stuff, actually. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. And for just an example of somebody talking about how difficult something can be, watch the Nvidia presentation from yesterday. Jensen does a great job of talking about how challenging the math of modern computer graphics is behind the scenes. And as far as modeling is concerned and the math behind modeling, it's a similar degree of difficulty when you're moving into this volumetric world. But there are big advantages to what it offers, for sure. And that's why we're interested in pursuing it and innovating on it.
So, Greg, you're basically you're just using the ribbon and the smooth brush back and forth, just kind of applying. Okay.
Yep, and Sun will be happy. I think we talked about this in the last one. Now when you hold down Shift, it switches over to the actual smooth brush and the smooth brush settings. It still hasn't been modified to adopt the radius from the parent brush, which in this case would be the ribbon brush, but it will be. That's something that we definitely know is going to be important, but we're working on some other things this week right now, but that change will be in place workflow-wise, because it did annoy me a bit on this sculpt. The radius, having to switch that quite a bit, and
So
also
the strength is independent though. The strength is now kind
strength
of,
is now independent between the strength is always going to be derived from the smooth brush. When you hold down shift, it is switching to the smooth brush, but it's also adopting the radius from the smooth brush right now, which I don't know. We've been kind of torn talking about this internally because I think it's obvious that you do want to have the actual the radius be independent between the two, but it might be even a good idea to have a toggle for that, and just because there may be times that you want to have this persistent radius, especially as the application becomes more robust and you start doing more detailing work. That's where I could see having this persistent, unique smooth brush radius being more useful, and having more control over establishing settings for that stuff being more useful. And so, yep, there we go. Just tearing away at these fun spikes. As I started getting onto the detailing, I actually tried to start going in there and adding the ridges. And, because they have these growth ridges. I wonder what the shell is made out of. Is it keratin, right? Keratin's the material that your fingernails are made out of, correct?
Yeah, I think that's the best guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it is, because I mean, rhino horns, for instance, they're the same thing. I was actually watching a show on rhinos, but they were talking about that people are hunting rhinos to extinction for their horns, and there's this biologist that's like, look, it's absolutely idiotic. They're taking these horns and using it for special serums and stuff that have supposed health benefits, but it's no different than chewing your fingernails.
Right.
Yeah, it's like it's the same material. But yeah, I wonder what the actual shell itself is made out of. It's so cool that you look at this stuff like the shell is organic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is. It's organic, but it has these very beautiful geometric structures to it. It's almost like a crystal, instead of something that you would typically see as organic. It's just always so interesting how these materials get adapted into biology and then end up producing these beautiful forms.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's you see it a lot in plants, and
yeah, sure. Yeah, that was one thing we were supposed to go and do this week on my camping trip. I wanted to go rock hunting again. That was the family vacation every year when I was growing up, was rock and mineral hunting. I asked many times to go to Disney World. They never agreed. They're like, no, we're gonna go hunt for tourmaline instead. And so we went rock hunting, but I've been trying to go rock hunting again. As we were planning on going to West Texas to a place called, there's Lano and Mason, and apparently you can find topaz in those areas. But we're still debating if we want to go, since it's going to be to that portion, because it's going to be so hot. Doesn't seem like very good mineral hunting, but I always was fascinated by crystals because it's like I don't know. It's just this really interesting example of how certain conditions produce certain results, right? You have the correct elemental materials, you have the right conditions as far as geologically what it was exposed to, like heat and pressure and things of that sort, and you end up with these gorgeous crystals that are automatically formed, and predictably so. They always form in a predictable way. Even if there are variations, you can identify what caused that variation, like an impurity or a change in the actual environmental conditions that resulted in this beautiful mineral. And it always was one of those things to me that was like, this is the universe, like, kind of showing you, like, hey, yeah, of course life can exist because there are these organizational structures that can be relied on. Like a quartz crystal formed under the right conditions on a planet in another galaxy will be the same as one found here on Earth. It's just something that doesn't change as long as all the conditions are the same.
right now, like, how do those geodes form? Where they look like
Gas.
typical is that's just all gas?
Yeah, well, you can find geodes in northern Texas. We were looking at going to northern Texas in the Panhandle, but it was a little bit too far away. We didn't want to spend all our time driving. But yeah, they're volcanic, right? And the geode, usually a bubble of gas, is what forms that cavity, and then you have minerals that seep through this volcanic rock and will pool, and then slowly I don't want to say evaporate, but the water dissipates over time and leaves behind these minerals, and that may be due to a lot of heat. I don't know exactly how quartz forms, but I think quartz requires a lot of heat. But then it leaves this coating of crystal inside, and if you're lucky, there was a low enough concentration that it leaves a full cavity, and then you get these nice spiky crystals, and sometimes it fills it all the way up, and you have those agate geodes that are solid. They're also pretty, but I don't know. I like crystals.
I'm thinking about it, Greg. I think this. I think you might have to do like an alternate version of this guy. He has to be wearing a party hat just to go with just to keep the spiky.
I thought you were gonna say something like, "Why do you make like amethyst crystals coming out of his shell?" Yeah, I think that would be fun. That'd be awful. It would take a lot of time. But you want a party hat?
Yeah, just to kind of keep the spiky.
I think you should for the spikiness, huh? I was thinking a Shriner hat. That doesn't go with the spikiness, but I don't know. I think that has comedic value.
Although I think you're onto something like a crystal turtle might be like actually a cool idea.
That would be fun. This doesn't have anything to do with crystals, but I always really loved that that illustration that was done early in the Moto days. I think it was like version 2 of Moto 201 or around that time. But I think it was I'm going to mispronounce the name, so anybody feel free to correct me. I think it was Khalid Murkai. Where it was a whale that had an island growing out of its back.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
It was so cool. I mean, especially at that time, it was just like, whoa, how did you do that? But yeah, stuff like that is super cool where you take a creature and incorporate an environment onto it. Crystals would be fun. A crystal shell tortoise. That would be a lot of fun to render in the new Radeon Pro render.
Oh yeah. I had a chance to check that out during Siggraph. That was pretty awesome. It's available now too.
Yeah,
right?
it's available in beta. It doesn't have everything hooked up yet, so don't expect it to be a fully functioning production ready render yet. But it's showing a huge amount of promise. It's crazy fast. I love it. I was testing it on 2 WX8200s, which I just got an email back from AMD saying, "Hey, can you drop those off?" I'm like, darn it. Man, they were like on their game. They want those back right away.
Yeah.
But I even ran it on an Nvidia card here too, so it is hardware agnostic, and I mean, really impressive how well that render performs. Like some comparisons I did was like there was this interior environment. I took like a library asset off Turbo Squid, and I took a sculpt a capture actually of the Pietà by Michelangelo and put that in the center of the library. And the purpose being like, okay, I want to have an interior space that's lit, largely from outside. I had 2 area lights inside, but filling up this gigantic space where that's going to be a challenge, just as far as rays bouncing around over a gigantic space, but then a detailed item in the center, and then throw on a whole bunch of depth of field, like way too much, and some subsurface on the Pietà, and geez, it just tore it apart. And I was comparing it with CPU renderers, and it rendered to the same degree of quality. On that Pietà thing, that was around like 30 to 35 minutes to get a nice, clean, refined image on 2 cards, on 2 WX8200s. And then on the Threadripper, which is what I was testing on with 16 cores, I mean, a great CPU. It was about 2 hours, 2 to 2.5 hours on the CPU side.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so I mean, GPU rendering is it's almost not worth questioning whether or not it's capable at this point anymore. It's beyond a reality. It's such a great way to be able to work because man, those GPUs can just cast rays like crazy.
Yeah, at the AMD booth, Greg Leuenberger and I were kind of like testing it out, and it was just blazing fast. We were testing it on a single card. I can't remember off the top of my head which card it was, but it was one of AMD's.
They had a machine there with 4 in
wow.
there. Yeah, and actually, the interesting thing about Threadripper, I think I actually during my presentation I also got the name of the new Threadripper wrong. But I'm pretty sure it's the 2990 WX. I'm pretty sure, but that's 32 cores. And some of their new CPUs actually support 128 PCI Express lanes. Whoa. And the Threadripper 1950X, which is what I was working on, which is the one that came out last year, that supports 64, which on its own is awesome. My little i7 that I have here. I call it little. It's a 6-core. Unfortunately, now by modern standards, it's little. It supports, I think, 40, and so big difference, especially if you are interested in GPU rendering. You want lots of PCI Express lanes, not just because of all the cards, that matters, but something like having like 128 PCI Express lanes means you can still use your PCI slots for other things, like M.2 drives, and like I've got a USB 3 card here in this computer right now that's taking up a slot. It just gives you that flexibility to have a whole lot of PCI slots and still have like 4 cards or something like that in there.
Mm-hmm.
Only consideration, especially in Texas, is you probably want to turn your air conditioning way up. It definitely heated up my apartment pretty substantially.
Oh, yeah.
And to be fair, I did throw the breakers in my apartment a couple times. But that was my own.
Wow.
Well, I had my Alienware laptop and my regular desktop, which is to be fair, it's overclocked. It's got like a 1,000-watt power supply in it and probably uses all the wattage that power supply is capable of. And then threw on top of that this AMD Threadripper system that has, I think, a 1,400-watt power supply, all on the same breaker, and that was just a bad idea. So once I switched it over to its own unique breaker, it was no problem at all. But I really want to have a system with 4 cards in it. I'm completely sold on that at this point. It's worth it.
Now, what's it called? There's recently a development where you can now combine RAM between cards, right?
Well,
wondering.
yeah, Nvidia allows for that with their new RTX Quadro cards. You have a shared memory pool for multiple cards. I'm not sure exactly how new that is, and I'm not sure how that can be taken advantage of, whether or not you need to support it on the software side or not. But it sure is promising where, if you have 4 8-gigabyte cards, you have 32 gigabytes of memory. That's awesome. That can be pulled. I'm pretty sure the Pro render supports Uncore memory or whatever, which by the way, I'm making a bunch of assumptions right now. I don't have anything in front of me verifying all this, but I think it can actually go to disk and shuffle information back and forth out of your actual proper memory. Because unfortunately, right now, memory is very expensive.
Right.
It just is, and I think that's affected some of the decisions on some of these video cards too, because they're very dependent upon supplies of memory. Which, I mean, you're talking about like GDDR6, like really high-end memory. But I'm pretty sure it can support going beyond the limitations of the amount of memory on your card. But hopefully, we'll see more shared memory pools amongst multiple cards, because that would make it so much more practical. Because the only concern that I really still have about GPU rendering is memory. I mean, for the most part, you can be responsible and get your render done. I remember when I started, working in Moto in production. I mean, I was doing renders on a 32-bit Moto. But having 64 gigabytes of memory available to you is certainly useful, and we can all figure out ways to use it. All right, so this is I got to the end of this half. Now, this sculpt right here is not the halfway point. This is where the final sculpt currently lies, and I'm going to be going in and finishing out the back legs and finishing up the head more too. But you can see that with the front legs, it was one of these situations like, hey, I wonder if I can start detailing, and then it just kept on building out. Like, oh, I can add more scales, and I can add these nobules. It's like it's got fingernails coming out of its elbows. Like, really, that's what it looks like on the real thing. And just kept on adding more and more stuff. I'm like, wow, I can really do that. This is kind of amazing. And so I'm looking forward to going forward and pushing it to its limit. Probably, I think, maybe we'll hit 6 million polys. Remember, that's 6 million polys with local geometry. So the amount of detail that's being expressed by that 6 million polys is much more than, say, for instance, 6 million polys would be on a multi-resolution mesh with a uniform resolution throughout the entire mesh. But pretty cool stuff. I'm very satisfied with the progress that Villa's made with Kanova. This is really developing into a very interesting, very robust sculpting application that provides a pleasant sculpting experience. That's above all else what our goal is here.
Greg, really quickly, the little nodules on his front arms, are they separate Are they on a separate layer
Nope.
or?
Same layer.
Wow.
Yeah, the nodules, and I mean that the roundish nodules, not the big broad ones. The roundish nodules, those, that's just a really quick scribble right in there, and you'll see that in the video. We'll just go ahead and commit to doing that in well, we'll do that in about 2 weeks. I think I might have to take a trip. I'm not sure. But yeah, just go in there, just scribble, 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 and I think you can add all those little nodules all over the place. And actually, with the alligator snapping turtle, it has these weird, like, extended mole tendrils that come off of its neck, which is kind of wild, that I'd like to be able to see if I can get those more well articulated. But you can see that, especially considering I'm doing this with regular brushes, all regular brushes, and having to do a lot of manual sculpting work, that's annoying. But from my perspective and my purpose in participating in the development of this application is to see, like, okay, can we do this? And then once we establish, yes, we can, then it's like, all right, now let's try and improve the performance at these levels, and let's develop tools that facilitate workflows like this. And those are the types of things that we investigate as we play around with projects like this. So I'm sure workflow in Kanova will look very different a year from now. But in its current state, I'm super, super excited about where we're at, and can't stop throwing credit to Bill for all the amazing work that he's done in that regard.
Definitely.
Cool, cool. All right, well, I'm gonna go and pack for my very hot camping trip. What are you doing the rest of the day, Ed?
Oh, probably going to continue working. Got the Moto Not Monday, September 3rd. I'm just going to create a little banner for that. It's going to be procedural modeling. So if anyone's interested, just check your emails, and there should be an announcement about that.
Very nice, yeah, and plenty to check out in the Moto 12 series. It's we're getting really positive feedback from our beta testers, which they're usually super critical, but they're loving 12.2 and what we've shown them of that. So yeah, you guys definitely want to tune into that. Moto's doing awesome. It's doing really awesome, which is exciting.
It definitely is, yeah.
So cool. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. And we will talk again for the second portion of this sculpt, and get through that, and talk to you a little bit more about the random things that we are doing on the day-to-day. And we would love if you contribute and ask questions, because we'd like to interact with you with Kanova more, because your feedback on this application is very important to us, because it's going to help us make an application that you want to use. And that would be the overreaching goal if there was one single goal. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.